In this video, we're going to go over all of the Gargoyle Gecko Morphs, and I'm going to give you guys an update on the White Gargoyle Gecko project. Stick around. Now, just like Crested Geckos, there is huge variability with the Gargoyle Geckos. There are two base pattern types similar to the Crested Geckos, and that is one that has horizontal pattern and one that has more of a vertical pattern. Now, I'll explain what I mean by that. These striped animals would resemble similar to like pinstripe crested geckos, whereas the reticulated animals will resemble more like the harlequin or tigerine pattern on the crested geckos. Now, as you can see, these are base pattern morphs. Pretty much any other gargoyle gecko, with the exception of one that I will show later on, has this type of pattern. Now, gargoyle geckos can have reds, oranges, and that is what we call pattern color that goes on top and attaches itself to the actual pattern that they have here, this kind of pattern. The one I have on my right hand here, this tailless girl, is actually a reticulated black and white. This crazy boy is a yellow striped. You could really see the difference when you put these guys next to each other. One is purely black and white, and one has browns and more of like a yellowish tint to the base color. Now, this is what we call the base color. So base color being black and white for this girl, and the base on this guy being yellow. So we have different types of color, the base color and the pattern color. The one that we're talking about here is base color. These animals do not have any pattern color. Now, the base pattern can also have a lot of variation. In my right hand, you see a kind of like a brown banded reticulated animal, and the same girl, the black and white reticulated animal I showed you in the beginning. Now, this guy has a base color that's brown. This is typically the base color that you see on wild type animals. And if you look closely, where her pattern is more web-like and scattered, this guy has that same web-like scattered pattern, but with more defined bands that go across his body. This is what we call that vertical pattern that goes across the body that makes a banded reticulated animal. So this is a banded and this is a reticulated. This is also a reticulated animal, but this one is not a banded. So in other words, every banded gargoyle gecko is reticulated, but not every reticulated gargoyle is banded. Now, just like the reticulated patterned animals, the striped animals also have a lot of variation. You can see this guy here has a very, very wide and thick mid-dorsal line, whereas these two females, their mid-dorsal line isn't as thick. Now, some of the stripes are more zigzaggy, some stripes are straighter. It all depends on the lineage of that gecko. Typically, I find that geckos or stripes that have been bred for generations to be striped have straighter lines. I would say maybe if both parents are striped, then the animals that are produced by those animals are always going to be striped, versus when you have stripes that have more zigzag pattern, sometimes you'll pop up reticulated animals for that. At least that is from my experience. The beauty about gargoyle geckos is that there is a wide variety of colors and color patterns and color mutations and all kinds of things in between. So this is all base color. These would be more of like yellow base color. But now I'm going to show you what happens when we put some color pattern on these animals. So when we throw color pattern on striped gargoyle geckos, we get the most spectacular looking gecko, in my opinion. Now, these are red and orange striped gargoyle geckos. Honestly, they're more like borderline orange, maybe like a darker orange. But as you can see, this girl on my right hand is a yellow base, and she does not have any mid-dorsal stripes, as where this boy on my left hand is more of like a white base, but he does have some pretty good mid-dorsal stripes. Now, this is an older gecko. His color was a lot better when he was younger. It's interesting to see that some geckos, like this one, I would consider an orange quad striped, and this one would be a 6 striped, because when you count all the stripes, the 2 lateral stripes and then the 4 dorsal stripes, you get 6, whereas this girl doesn't have those 2 mid-dorsal stripes running down the middle of her back. There's a lot of different types of color pattern striped animals. Some just have mid-dorsal stripes. Some have, very, very thick lateral and mid dorsal stripes. As much color as you could put on these animals is up to you and the type of lineage and the quality of the red and the color pattern that you breed into them. It's one of the reasons why Deadpool is so special, because he is one of my oldest geckos, yet he looks like the day I got him. That color pattern on Deadpool has never faded, whereas you could see on this guy here, he's a spectacular animal, but he's definitely faded a lot. His red has gone down since the day I got him, and he's not even as old as Deadpool. Now, this is a point I like to make. These are two red striped girls. They're both beautiful and high quality animals. They're a little bit, faded and worn out from breeding. But you can see on my right hand here, this girl has really thick and high quality mid dorsal stripes, whereas this girl has mid dorsal stripes, but you can see they're not quite as thick as the girl on my right. Still beautiful animal. I find that the ones that have these thick mid dorsal stripes are the ones that the color lasts a little bit longer. Now, these two animals are examples of what I would call upper red striped lateral animals. And what I mean by that is that they do not have mid dorsal stripes. They don't have that red going down the middle of the back, but they do have these outer bands on the upper lateral that has that color pattern. As you can see, my male here on my right has more exaggerated color pattern. The red covers a lot more area, and it even spills down to the lower lateral here, whereas this female doesn't have as much. You could see it follows all the way from the cheek, the top, and all the way to the tail basically. So it's a very, very interesting difference of red stripe combinations that you can make. And obviously my male on the right here is a little bit darker. He's super fired up, whereas this female does not get anywhere near this dark, but she is fired down right now. So firing up means just that they're flaring up their colors, whereas firing down means that their colors are super relaxed and not as bright. The cool thing about gargoyle geckos is that whether they're fired up or fired down, you're still going to see that color pattern. Now, you may be wondering what happens when you put color pattern on a reticulated or banded animal. And this is what you get: an orange blotched animal or a red blotched animal. Now, the patterns and the blotching can vary from super blotches that have almost the whole body covered in blotching, or low expression blotches that barely have any cheek coloration or blotches around their body. There's a lot of variety in between, but what's interesting about these animals is that they tend to be very messy. Their blotches could go all over, and some of my favorite super blotched animals will have a lot of blotching and color on their belly as well. Now, these two are blotched animals, but they're very, very different. On my left hand, I have a female that is a low expression orange blotched, and on my right hand, I have a high expression, or also known as a super blotched gargoyle gecko. Now, we tend to refer as the blotching or the red color pattern as incomplete dominant. Pretty much works like a dominant mutation, whereas it gets passed down almost to every single offspring. When you pair two blotches together, you're going to tend to create maybe 25% super blotches. Now, those are not exact numbers. We actually haven't been doing a lot of investigation and research when it comes down to the specific genetics of gargoyle geckos yet, but it is a work in progress. And as the years go on, we will get better at this. A lot of people ask, is my gargoyle gecko a super blotch or is it a regular blotch? And my answer tends to be, if you have to ask if your gargoyle gecko is a super blotched, chances are it is not a super blotched. Super blotched animals will tend to have full red cheeks, really big, and a lot of spread on those red blotching. They'll have blotching all the way down their tail and some around their belly, their lower belly area, or even on their laterals. Now, regular blotched animals, they have very, very little blotching. Now, this is a very low expression girl, and she's also older, so her blotching has tended to fade a little bit, but you could still see it through in certain areas, especially down by the tail base and by the neck. If you were to say, I want to get a blotched animal and you're expecting this but got this, you'd be very disappointed. So that is why it is important to know a little bit about the lineage or the parents of the animal, or have your breeder help you understand the progression of these animals, because when they're very little, they show little to no blotching at all, and they start to slowly, the color pattern starts to slowly creep in, and then eventually, they turn into this absolute masterpiece of an animal. So it is very important to know, where your animal comes from if you're looking to get high quality or particular look in the animal that you want. Now, going back to the base color, the pink base color is actually the rarest base coloration in gargoyle geckos. It is very, very hard to find and reproduce, and I'm still not exactly sure how it's passing down, but I do have quite a few pink base color groups that I'm breeding and working on refining to make sure that we could provide a wide variety of different colorations for gargoyle geckos. Now, what's cool about these animals is that it is a very soft pink and a very, very unique looking coloration. As you can see, it's not white, it's not brown, it's not orange or red, it's somewhere in between. And what I really like about these animals is that when they're fired up, a lot of them tend to be like a hot pink, very, very unique coloration, nothing like any other color pattern or base coloration morph I've shown so far. One thing I have noticed about these pink animals is that their bellies tend to be white, so that pink doesn't go down to the bellies. Their bellies tend to be white, and they have these orange eye rims. They typically have blue eyes, but they have these orange eye rims that I almost always see on the pink base color mutation. Will that be a telltale sign to see if the animal will end up turning pink or not? We don't know yet, because when they hatch out, they definitely do not look like this, and it takes them a couple months, maybe years, to even end up this coloration. So pink base color, super awesome. But now I want to talk about the eye coloration and the uniqueness of gargoyle geckos, which are their eyes and the eye rim. Now, one of the rarest pattern combinations is called the mosaic pattern mutation. Now, this is something that happens kind of randomly, and it seems to be a combination of banded and striped patterning. As you can see, with all these three animals, there's a lot of variability, but it looks like the bands and the reticulation is trying to be striped. So you can see on this guy, there's a little bit of stripes forming here down the dorsal. These bands are starting to get pushed horizontally like they would with a striped animal. And same with these two animals here. There's a lot of variation with them, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint what makes a mosaic animal because it is so different. And it oftentimes looks like a banded animal. But these are some examples of some mosaic patterned animals. Now, this is what I would consider a higher quality mosaic animal that also has some orange pattern color. You can see the pattern is very irregular. It almost looks like there's half circles on his laterals, and he still has some of that stripe that's trying to push these bands down the dorsal. So very, very interesting and unique pattern. Definitely one of the rarest gargoyle geckos in the market. Now, one of the most interesting details about gargoyle geckos are their eyes. In my opinion, they have some of the most stunning eyes in the gecko world. And one of the reasons being is that eye rim, the rim that surrounds the eyeball, and the actual color of the eye is very unique to gargoyle geckos because they come in all sorts of different colors and patterns. My male here on the right hand has blue eyes with a yellow eye rim and a lot of reticulation on the eye, whereas my girl here, this is called a phantom gargoyle gecko, and she has black eyes with like a very, very light orange rim coloration. Now, the phantom gargoyle geckos tend to develop over time. It usually starts to darken up within the third, fourth, or even fifth year of life, and they definitely do not hatch like that. So I've seen all sorts of eyes from blue eyes to gray eyes to dark eyes turn pitch black like this, but it is not something that you will see when the geckos are born. This takes time to develop. Now, it is very, very striking when you see an animal like this with pitch black eyes, and then also when you see one like this with crystal clear blue eyes. Gargoyle gecko eyes are some of the most interesting details about them, and I absolutely love these traits on these geckos. Now, if you've been following us for a while, you know that we have this exciting white gargoyle gecko project. Whether these guys are hypos or amelanistics, I am still not sure, but I do have an update on the project. Now, this on my right hand is Vanilla Ice, and this is White Boy. These guys are brothers, and Vanilla Ice is completely fired down, and White Boy here is fired up. These past few weeks, White Boy has remained fired up, and he has not been his fired down self that looks like this. These geckos are very, very special because they're unlike any other white gecko I've ever seen. When I see them, I've seen, you know, hundreds and thousands even of gargoyle geckos. You will get a lot of striped gargoyle geckos that are black and white that when they fire down, they basically look like this. These guys are different. They do not fire up whatsoever like those other gargoyle geckos. They don't get those really dark stripes going across their body this as much as they fire up, and they don't have any black on them whatsoever. This is more of like a very, very light gray when I look closely on him, and it's of like a pastel coloration when they fire up and paper white when they fire down. Now, for the past few years, I have been working on trying to reproduce this look. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to reproduce it yet. What I did was I bred this guy to a bunch of females and this guy to a bunch of females. Those babies I raised up, and the daughters of this guy went and bred with this guy, and the daughters of this guy went and bred with this guy. Speaking traditionally with reptile genetics, if this was a recessive mutation, I would have popped up some white gargoyle geckos by now, but it doesn't appear to be a simple recessive mutation. Could there be something else going on in the genetics and we could still figure it out and reproduce them? Absolutely. But to this point, we have proven that it is not a simple recessive mutation. The look, this particular look, I haven't been able to reproduce yet. I have made very, very light and borderline white offspring from them, but they're not the same thing. When they fire up, they still have those really dark stripes and that white background base color, but it's not like these guys. So I still have a few tricks up my sleeve. I'm still going to try, but as of now, I can tell you that this is most likely not a recessive mutation because I've hatched this year close to 20-something offsprings from these two guys, and none of them have turned out. So either I have the worst luck and worst odds in the world, or this is not a recessive mutation. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And even though this might not pan out to reproduce as easy as I would like, I do have something that is very promising, and I'm going to show you that next. Now, what I have here is a very, very exciting mutation that is up and coming and that I will be breeding this year, 2025, or I should say next year. This is what we call the clown morph, or, you know, it's hard because we still don't know exactly what's going on here, but you could see it has some of that striping. It has a lot of reduced pattern, but it forms, whatever's going on here is making them form some sort of circle on the laterals, and a lot of reduction in pattern on the head and the upper laterals. This is the only male that I have ready to breed, but I do have two probable females that will probably be breeding in the 2026 season that I will show you in a second. This mutation, I'm very confident that it's either an incomplete dominant or maybe a recessive mutation. The person I got these from has been able to reproduce quite a few of them, and there's even a few of them floating around here in the US. Gargoyle geckos are still in their infancy when it comes to morphs and mutations. We have seen the crested geckos take off with the cappuccinos, lily whites, axanthics, and etc. But gargoyle geckos are right on the brink of this mutation explosion, and this is one of the most promising new gargoyle gecko morphs that is coming. I showed a video with these guys before, but now I'm going to show you the two holdbacks that I have growing out that rival or are even better than this male right here. Now, these two little gargoyle geckos are not fired up, but they are the same exact gene mutation that's going on with that previous gecko. As you can see, they have quite a reduction in pattern when it comes to their upper laterals and their head pattern. And this one in particular has very pronounced circles on its side. They're a little smaller circles, but circles nonetheless. And this girl here has really nice orange coloration going down the upper laterals, but she also has some of those circles that you see on the side there. And it's not a, you know, regular stripe by any means. Anybody that's been seeing gargoyle geckos for a long time could tell that this is something different, and you could see it on these two little ones. What's exciting about this morph is that a long time ago, I actually talked about it. A buddy of mine imported a female from Canada that was very similar to this. That was Matt Karwacki, and that was the clown morph. That's what he called it. Wasn't able to reproduce too many of them, but the project was now given to another friend of mine, Eric, and Eric and I are gonna come together and try to breed some of his to some of mine and see if we could reproduce these and make a lot of them, because ultimately these are really cool, really dope animals. And we have, you know, orange stripe variations. We have more of like a regular stripe variation. What I ultimately want to do with these is create some really nice big circles on the sides and just have a completely different look to gargoyle geckos. Gargoyle geckos are just getting started. The morphs is what makes this hobby so exciting, in my opinion. I love my good old normal wild type looking gargoyle gecko, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that the most exciting thing about gargoyle geckos is all the color mutations, especially with the reds and the oranges, yellows, pinks, and so on and so on. You know, wish me luck with this project. We'll keep you guys updated. Make sure you subscribe, because we are going to be trying to breed these guys and produce them. And as a little bonus, I wanted to show you guys Kotex. This is a Deadpool Jr. offspring, Deadpool grandkid, and she will be breeding this 2025 season, which I am super stoked for. But I did want to mention, guys, that Deadpool is not a gene, it's not a morph, it is a line, and it is our line of gargoyle geckos, of red striped gargoyle geckos at that. There are other lines out there that people get confused. They think that it is a morph, like the Bacon line, which belongs to Carl Vargas, but that is also a line and not a morph. So when somebody tells you they have a Deadpool gecko or a Bacon gecko, you have to make sure that you track them back to our lineages, and they're not just saying that and using that name to just basically sell geckos. Because I have seen a lot of people try to make up, you know, that they got these geckos from me. I look them up and I've never seen this person, never heard from this person. So do not fall for the scams. If you want the real deal, you have to go to the source. And with that being said, we'll see you guys in the next one.